problem that you have is you have some people for whom you can never teach enough anti-British ideas about the empire,
exactly.
right? Like literally, I do wonder, like, how much is enough? Because ultimately, they never say, do they? They never say how much. And actually, my last blog for All in Britain was about this. It's like, okay, fine. Here, what? It's about time you actually sat down, created a curriculum, and said, right, this is what we think should be taught. Instead of just throwing it out there casually. Oh, there's just not enough. Well, what do you mean?
But they don't even mean that they want more of a certain topic taught. What they mean is they want more of a certain topic taught from one perspective, which is basically their perspective, and that applies across the board. So it's like the way which they would like to teach about society at the moment is basically the kind of Black Lives Matter narrative that it's unbelievably racist, and that you can only explain things through the prism of racism, or primarily things have to be explained through that prism, and actually there might be other explanations as well. And
so I would say it's less to do with the prism of racism. I think it's more to do with the structural racism, because I mean, you can believe that racism exists, and it does, and you can believe that people are acting racist ways and not go down the structural racist route. Actually, you know, if it ultimately within sociological thinking, within thinking in the humanities field, you do have the difference between structure and action. You know, so actually individuals do act, and that affects the structure, and of course the structure also affects your actions, and so you have, you know, sort of both things going on. But the idea that it's purely structural, I think, is something that's interesting, because it gives them the ability to have a lot of power, because then they can have the ability to say, well, I need to be part of that structure, I need to destroy that structure, and they go down the whole revolutionary thing. But also the idea that they need to be, but in some ways it's a job creation scheme for them as well, you know, like they need to then be in those places to make sure the structure is right. But actually, I don't think the structural explanation holds. I think part of the problem that you have with progressives in education on this issue, I mean, I've seen it before, where people are talking about white oppression, and we must teach, you know, teach children about white oppression and all this kind of stuff. And I just think it's ridiculous. Like, you don't have the evidence to suggest it, you know. And also, you know, of course, it's gone down that whole, it's influenced by Marxism and the whole concept of false consciousness. And of course, that brings the whole thing together, doesn't it? Because if people oppose you, they've just got false consciousness. It can't be that their experiences are different to your experiences, or their understanding is different to yours, because you've read different things, you've experienced life in a different way. I mean, you know, like I said, my uncle's basically joking, but there are times when, you know, he's turned around very seriously and said, well, you know, you should respect the fact that you do have rule of law in this country. And my uncle's Indian, and he's from India. You know, he's lived there his entire life, post-colonialism, by the way. So, you know, it's not like he would have been brought up to ever think the British Empire was a good thing necessarily. But you can't just go, well, everything about Britain is awful because they had an empire, and everything about everywhere else is great, because that's not the perspective.
But it's so juvenile. It's basically the opposite of what an enlightened person should think like, and that's basically what's being drilled into kids. Is these teachers have had it drilled into them that they have to be basically activists, and that their job is to make children kind of vaguely activists as well in their understanding of things, when actually really they should just be teaching them about the world in a relatively neutral way, I think, and letting the kids form their own opinions based on the information that they are better able to master, the skills they acquire. But actually, it's just the whole assumption underpinning so much of education now, and just generally on that kind of left side of things, is that basically anti-Western, that's the only way you can look at things, is that we kind of are somehow morally bankrupt. All blame for most things lies with either the West or structural problems in society, and that's the only starting point for really any issue, even if the evidence on some issues doesn't not only back that up, but doesn't only not back it up, but also might really, really screw over some of the people they're claiming to help. That's like one of the main reasons why I stopped being so. I used to be so left-wing at university. I was just like a massive Marxist. And I was just like, at that point, I started thinking, that was exactly at the point at which I started thinking that they might all be like kind of mad. Because, so for example, I was studying sociology of education or loads of papers to do with feminism and so on. And I just started from the assumption that, yeah, there are these massive structural problems to do with racism, sexism, and so on. And obviously all these statistics are going to give me so much evidence to use in my arguments. And then I would like be learning about massive, like, why is it that everything's so bad in schools? Is it structural racism, or is it just the individual racism of the teachers? And then I'd look at the statistics, and it would be like working class white kids would be doing basically the worst. And there'd be differences between, say, Black African and Caribbean Black kids and so on in the UK, which can't be explained just on racism. No. It shouldn't be just, or between Pakistani and Indian kids, or between Jewish and traveller kids. Like, there are so many different variations on what's going on. But the assumption of basically so much of my work and what I was being taught was, oh yeah, obviously, given that these structural inequalities exist, which form of racism is it? And as I started from that perspective and just ended up saying, but these statistics don't make any sense in the context of those arguments. And the response to that was basically just like, to go blank and then open your eyes again and be like, so which form of racism is it? And I was just like, this is irrational. Okay. I'm still as opposed to racism as I ever was. It's just that you don't have to think that everything's racism if there are other explanations.
Just out of my own curiosity, because I mean, when I was studying A-levels, when I was studying university, I was quite fortunate because we actually didn't have this situation. I think it's gotten worse in terms of teachers thinking they should be activists, in terms of not giving both perspectives, etc., etc. Because I mean, when I studied politics, we just didn't have the critical study. I mean, we had elements of it, but maybe it's because of partly of what I studied as well, the kind of history and politics I studied. But it was still seen as your responsibility to teach the different perspectives, the liberal perspective, the right-wing, conservative perspective, whatever the different theories were from whatever, political stance. It was seen as, you would teach a range and then you would come to your own conclusion. And it's really fascinating now to see people who doing similar courses, either politics or history, who are literally, like you say, that you had to start with the assumptions and then find out for yourself, which is, I just find that so mind-blowing, because it's like, well, that's not really an education, that is actually an indoctrination, which you then have had to overturn. I think part of the problem is that actually white working class kids in particular, they are really a stickler, aren't they? And they really do I think, to be perfectly honest, that whole progressive group would love it if they just didn't exist, because they're the ones who really, because you see, even with the travellers, you can kind of go down their ethnic minorities, they've been oppressed in the past, but you can't really do that with white working class kids. I mean, I suppose you kind of can with the working class element, but of course that doesn't quite work in the way they want it to work. But the problem with white working class is they undermine other arguments. Okay, so if you take the whole argument about teaching more black history to black kids or more Asian history to Asian kids, because it's going to improve their self-esteem and therefore their outcomes. Okay, that's a typical example. Well, then you have to somehow say, well, okay, if we're teaching all this white history in inverted commas, why is it not having that impact on those white working class kids? Why are they not doing better? Because surely, if you just learn about people who've got the same skin colour as you, if that's going to boost your self-esteem and that's going to improve your outcomes, well, then it should be happening. So why aren't they doing as well? You see, and those kind of arguments are really hard for them to tackle, which is why I'm saying they'd rather avoid the issue or kind of be quite patronising about it.
Yes, like what Majid Nawaz calls the bigotry of no expectations. I actually think that is more big. And so there are obviously there are still like hardcore racists in society. Obviously. Yeah, of course. And so if whenever I make these arguments, I have to caveat it by saying I'm not kind of insane. I obviously realize there is the odd nutter racist around, and there are even aspects of kind of some forms of fringe political discourse which are quite racist, and so those things do exist. But when I'm arguing against these left-wing arguments, I'm not saying that there is no racism. I'm saying that the things that these people say affect the everyday life of someone in a kind of inner city school and stuff aren't affected by that sort of racism. I just don't think it's borne out by reality. You might get one kind of racist incident or something every so often where someone walks past the school and says something, but in terms of the minutiae of the interactions those kids experience with their teachers and so on, I just don't think that those racism explanations or the structural racism explanations are borne out by any of the statistics or by reality, but they're constantly taught as the key factor. And that ends up arguably completely screwing over ethnic minority kids. It doesn't just apply in education, I think it applies across the board. So a classic example of that, the first thing which really made me be confident that I thought the left had just gone absolutely mad was when I was reading about why some kids in the school, I think it was like some kids in school were parts of gangs, and there was like really, really bad gang problems in these schools where kids would be coming in with knives, and there'd be a massive percentage of kids who were excluded and so on because of the disruption in school, and loads of them were getting stabbed and dying disproportionately to other groups. And then I was thinking, man, this is terrible. I wonder how this should be solved to kind of help these kids from these backgrounds. And all the academic literature I was reading, or such a high percentage of it, would be saying things like, it's awful, these kids come in and the teachers are in kind of subtly, unconsciously racist towards them because they associate the fact that they're wearing hoods and they have their trousers down by their ankles and stuff with the fact that they're probably a gang member. And it's like, yeah, okay, fine. You don't want the teachers to be prejudiced in that respect. And maybe that might be 1/50th of the problem, is the fact that you might not necessarily be in a gang if you have really baggy hoodie on and really low slung trousers. But 49/50ths of the problem is the fact that those kids are coming into school doing that sort of stuff and stabbing each other. And the academic focus should mainly be on what are the cultural reasons and the societal reasons that are meaning that these kids are at risk of getting stabbed and are stabbing one another. And the focus is just on why there's racism towards the kids who are dressing in that way and so on.
True.